Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cop Watch TV. Just want to welcome everyone into our live show where we are going to break down and talk about some of the most interesting cases in policing that have happened in the last week. And we have a couple of strange ones and a couple of controversial ones that we're going to go ahead and talk about. First of all, though, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and do that over at Cop Watch TV. Please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, share it with friends and family. And one of the reasons we want you to do that is not just so you can watch the incredible body camera video that we get from around the country and we post, but also so you can be part of these live shows, which we typically do on Fridays right around lunchtime. Noon Mountain Time is when we do these live shows. As many people as possible as we can get into these shows and to watch the chat, that is what we prefer, because we think it's really interesting to talk about some of these cases. And then I really like to see exactly what people think about these cases. Maybe you have a different opinion than I do. So that's one of the things that as I'm going through these cases, definitely put in the chat if you disagree with what I'm saying, or if you agree with what I'm talking about, let me know. That way we can go back and forth, and debating about these issues is one of the most important things. Just want to welcome everybody in. Looks like we've got Ryan in. We've got Cajun Randy. Good to see you. Kenton Hall of Shame from Ohio. They are in as well. And Autistic Shill is from Winnipeg, Canada. So want to welcome everybody in as well. You can go ahead and follow. Follow me over at Police Law News pretty much everywhere. But most importantly, please make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to the Cop Watch TV channel. All right, so the first case that we're going to talk about, and this one is really strange. You know, this is one of those cases that I saw the video, was either on Twitter or TikTok. I saw the video of this case, and it was so strange. The behavior by the police officer was so bizarre that I didn't think that it was real. I thought that it was some kind of reenactment or some kind of a funny training video, or maybe like an old, like a Mike the cop video or something like that. I didn't think it was real. I actually contacted a couple of different creators in this space that I know, just to see, hey, is this video real or is it not? Tragically, this is real. And if you follow this stuff at all, you know which case I'm going to talk about. So I'm really curious to see what your thoughts are on it, because I have some pretty strong opinions. So this is a case and a video that went viral from Reform, Alabama. And listen, so one of the reasons why I immediately thought, okay, this shit has to be fake, is because it's from Reform, Alabama. I mean, it sounds like it's one of those like fake police departments, like River City Cops, you know, it's almost like a fake police account. Like, that's what this seemed like. And I was gonna laugh at the video because it's so ridiculous, but no, Reform, Alabama, it's an actual place, and this is something that actually happened. So essentially this was a video, looks like it was taken from a cell phone camera video that depicted part of an interaction between Reform, Alabama police officer Dana Elmore and an individual who she had under arrest, a 24-year-old named Micah Washington. So people are upset about this case, and you know, they probably should be, because this one isn't good. So let me break down what the cell phone video shows. So essentially it shows part of the interaction, meaning when the cell phone video starts, Mr. Washington, he's already in handcuffs, his hands are behind his back, and the very beginning of the video, you can see that there's an officer who's later identified as Dana Elmore, who's essentially escorting Mr. Washington to the vehicle. At one part in the video, only for like a split second, you can see a second officer is actually present. However, then they aren't in the camera shot anymore. So one of the defenses for this officer, which I was combating pretty much all week, talking about this on TikTok and Twitter, is that people are saying, well, she was alone with this guy, and like, that objectively isn't true. There's at least one other officer there on scene. The very beginning of the video, you can go ahead and see that. So the video starts where she's essentially escorting Mr. Washington, who is in handcuffs behind his back, to her vehicle. As she gets to the vehicle, she goes and she performs a search. Basically, she has him lean over the hood of a car, and she starts to search him at that point. Now, the first thing that is strange, a Motorcycle Cop Chronicles podcast, awesome. Want to welcome you in. I follow you on a bunch of different channels. You have a great show. Want to welcome you guys in. So one of the strangest things about this, and one of the reasons why any reasonable person might think that, again, this is something like a River City Cops or an old Mike the Cop video, is because as she's doing the search while he's leaned over and bent over the front of the hood, is that she's doing this search with her taser in her hand. Okay, anyone who knows anything about policing, or is even just a casual watcher of body camera video, knows that police officers do not conduct searches while they're holding the taser in one hand. So not only is she holding the taser, she literally has the taser pressed up against Mr. Washington's back. Again, all this is strange. Now, I'm not going to defend that in almost any situation. If Mr. Washington were being combative, or he was resisting arrest or anything like that, I would have I would maybe not necessarily a different opinion, but I would at least say, okay, there's a reason why she has the taser out. He wasn't. From what we can see on the cell phone video, at least from where it starts, Mr. Washington is not resisting arrest in any way, shape, or form. So she starts to search him when she has a taser in her hand, and the taser is right up against his back. While she's searching him, Mr. Washington says that he has a gun. So she goes in and she grabs a gun from the pocket and she kind of tosses it on the hood of the car, and then after she tosses it on the hood of the car, she goes, "Oh yeah." And at that point, Mr. Washington he said, "Why are you saying oh yeah?" Then she says, "Shut the fuck up." So it was after. I missed a part. I missed the most important part. So she says, "Oh yeah." He says, "Why did you say oh yeah?" At that point, she deploys the taser in a drive stun mode. So basically, what drive stun mode is, she didn't step back and pull the trigger and deploy the probes at Mr. Washington. She basically just pressed it up against him. And she pulled the trigger in that manner. So it was basically a contact tasing. But it lasted somewhere between 4 to 5 seconds. And again, there really wasn't any objective reason or lawful objective for the officer to do that. He wasn't resisting arrest. He wasn't trying to pull away. Even in situations where people do try to pull away, officers tasing individuals under those situations, a lot of time that isn't justified. I mean, think about it. We just covered a case of Officer Kihos in Connecticut a couple weeks ago. And in that case, the individual wasn't in handcuffs. He was fighting with the officer and was actively resisting arrest, and the officer warned him that he was going to be tased, and the officer went ahead and tased him after that in the same type of contact tasing. In that case, again, individuals not in custody, actively resisting arrest and trying not to be handcuffed, and in that case, out of Connecticut, Officer Kihos, he's being prosecuted. So again, when it comes to tasings, this situation, the individual was in handcuffs and definitely not actively resisting arrest, at least from what we can see from the cell phone video. So she goes ahead and she does a contact tase. He's basically yelling and screaming in pain. I mean, anyone who's been tased before, it's not a comfortable thing, right? So he's basically screaming and in pain, and afterwards, she says, "Shut the fuck up. Do you want it again?" Again, it's just so strange, and it's a bizarre thing for a police officer to do. And again, Mr. Washington, from what we could see, he didn't resist arrest. He didn't pull away. He was leaning over the side of the car, seemingly like she asked him to do. So this use of the taser, not only is it inappropriate, but this has to be against any department SOP for use of force that I've ever seen, and it's probably against the law. This is probably a situation where she's going to be prosecuted for this. Again, we're going to go back to that Officer Kihos case because it's a similar situation. Only, again, in that case, Officer Kihos is tasing someone who was not handcuffed yet, who is actively resisting arrest. That case, 100% lawful and reasonable use of a taser. This is not. I think it's important to call out police officers when they have bad behavior, when they do something that is objectively against department policy or against the law. That's the only way that we can be credible when talking about cases like Officer Cure and Officer Kihos and Officer Lunsford in Las Cruces, New Mexico, who have legitimate and objectively reasonable uses of force, and they're prosecuted anyways. It gives us credibility when we can be honest about these cases. This is not objectively reasonable. What I'm curious about is there anyone in the comments who thinks that I'm wrong, who does think that there is, based on the evidence we have, and again, all we have is this cell phone video, based on what we can see, does anybody think that this use of a taser is objectively reasonable or within department policy? I'm really curious to see what anyone says, because I don't see any way that this case is an objectively reasonable use of a taser by the police officer. So the individual, Mr. Washington, he was arrested and he was booked on a shit ton of charges, from resisting arrest to drug trafficking to felon in possession of a firearm. Now, I have heard some rumors online. However, I haven't seen any objective evidence, and I tried to look this morning to see exactly what I did hear, and like I said, it's kind of come in third hand. Haven't seen anything from the DA, but again, please go ahead and correct me if anyone thinks that I'm wrong on this. That the charges against Mr. Washington have been dismissed, and at least what I've heard rumor-wise is that the drug trafficking charges, essentially the most serious ones, that those charges are fabricated. Actually had a couple people people reach out to me over on TikTok who identified themselves as friends of Mr. Washington, who pretty much said, yeah, he shouldn't have had a gun, but this drug trafficking shit, like it's bullshit. It's all fabricated. So again, if the charges are fabricated, that's going to be a whole host of other problems. With this case and with this officer as well. I think it's important to call out bad policing when we see it right in front of our faces. This is an example of it. Again, I'm not saying that the charges are fabricated or that he shouldn't have been charged, but I think it's really important really important to see if that is not. Kelton Tucker says fabricated. Yeah, right. Cops never lie. I think Kelton Tucker is being sarcastic there. As I've said before, not just because we have the best body camera channel out there here on Cop Watch TV, but obviously I want all police officers to wear body cameras. Not only do I want them to wear body cameras, I want them to record all citizen contacts that have something to do with a law enforcement contact. If a police officer gets out of a car and walks into a gas station and gets a cup of coffee, no, police officers shouldn't have their body camera recording then. But of course, in a situation like this, any kind of arrest, police officers should have their body camera running, because now, again, there's allegations that these charges are fabricated, that the drugs had been planted. Well, again, police officer having their body camera running, it's really easy to confirm or deny that. And if a police officer has their body camera running, there is a lot of incentive for the police officer to not record themselves committing a felony. So we don't know if the police officer was running their body camera footage. However, if they were running their body camera footage, we should know exactly what happened. Boom News want to welcome you into this to the chat as well. All right, so we're going to keep an eye on this case, and we're probably going to come back to it, because whether or not that there was body camera footage, whether or not, I know the officer has been placed on administrative leave. However, we don't know if she's going to be charged with any kind of a crime, but it does kind of look like that could be the case. Cajun Randy is asking the Motor Cop Chronicles podcast, bad tactics. Yeah, so Cajun Randy, what I think a motor is saying about bad tactics is not the whole thing, or the tasing wouldn't be considered bad tactics, but doing a search with a taser in your hand, just that is bad tactics. That doesn't make any sense. So again, I don't think that the motor cop was explaining anything else, but he made that comment, or they made that comment right after I said she was conducting a search with the taser in hand. Yeah, that is bad tactics. That's the first thing I said. That is absolutely correct. How about criminal behavior? Yeah, Cajun Randy, I said I think this probably is criminal behavior by the police officer. I do expect her to be charged, and unless there's something that we're completely missing, if what I'm saying is true, if what is depicted on the cell phone video, if that's all the evidence we have, yeah, it does seem like that there was criminal behavior from the police officer. And as I've said many times on the show, if a police officer commits a crime, they should be prosecuted. Okay, so we're going to keep an eye on this one. Now, the next case that I want to talk about, and it's a case that we've already covered. However, it's been in the news, so I'm just going to do a little bit of a recap of this case. And basically, this is about the Leonard Cure case. So this is the Leonard Cure case that happened in Camden County, Georgia, a couple months ago. Ben Crump is representing the family and the estate of Mr. Cure, and he did a press conference this week. So this case was again in the news. Ben Crump basically put Camden County on notice that there is going to be a $16 million lawsuit filed. Just kind of want to recap this and talk about this lawsuit really quick. So if you all remember, we did cover this case. It's important to say that Ben Crump, he's basically a police chaser, not necessarily an ambulance chaser. And what this case is about is Leonard Cure. He basically starts as almost a sympathetic figure, or how about definitely a sympathetic figure. So Leonard Cure did 16 years in prison for a crime, and he was just exonerated. So he was exonerated about 3 years ago after doing 16 years in prison for a crime that the government has now said that he didn't commit. He's out free. He got a settlement from that. I think it was over $800,000. To me, if you do 16 years in prison, $800,000, that doesn't sound like enough. But anyways, that's what he settled for with the state after being incarcerated for 16 years. Now Leonard, he's doing his own thing. He's back in school. He does speaking engagements. Well, he was stopped by a police officer for doing over 100 miles an hour. In a lot of states, that's considered reckless driving when you drive 30 miles or so above the speed limit. So Mr. Cure, he was stopped. He didn't stop right away. Finally, he pulled over. He made contact with a police officer. I did have some criticism of the tactics of the police officer, but again, bad tactics of a police officer isn't a crime to have bad tactics. But I did have and I got some pushback on whether or not his tactics were actually bad when it comes to that traffic stop. But the officer, basically was very reasonable when he contacted Mr. Cure. Here's what I mean by that, is because he first gave Mr. Cure directions and commands to cooperate, to put his hands behind his back. Mr. Cure refused. Then the officer, his escalation of force was extremely reasonable. The deputy with Camden County, he first went hands-on. He used empty hand tactics. When that didn't work, he pulled out a taser, and he let Mr. Cure know that he was being arrested. He gave him the reason why he was being arrested. Mr. Cure resisted arrest. During the application of the taser, which again was after the verbal command failed, empty hand tactics failed, so the officer went to a taser, which was reasonable. The taser did not have the desired effect, and as he was being tased, Mr. Cure actually attacked the police officer. As he was attacking the police officer, and the two men were basically doing a stand-up wrestling match, Mr. Cure was able to get the upper hand. He wrapped both of his hands around the neck of the officer, around the throat of the officer, and was trying to choke the officer. And he did one of the most creepiest fucking things I've ever seen on body camera video. As he had his hands wrapped around the officer's throat and was pushing the officer down, basically trying to choke the life of the officer, he was saying in this creepy whispering tone, "Yeah, bitch. Yeah, bitch." I mean, just a creepy fucking guy right there. At that point, while the officer is being choked, the officer could have and should have utilized deadly force immediately. As soon as someone's hands are wrapped around your throat, that's deadly force. Absolutely, that is deadly force. But the officer didn't do that. The officer, while he's being choked, he pulls out a baton and he starts to try to hit Mr. Cure with the baton as he's being choked. Again, to me, that was not good tactics because he didn't use enough force there. Well, quickly the officer realized that was not going to be effective, and it was at that point that he did pull out his handgun and that he did shoot Mr. Cure as Mr. Cure was trying to choke him, and not trying to, actually choking him with his hands around the officer's throat. So again, I not only was this on body camera video, but it was on dash camera video, because the officer, it's not like this isn't I thought that he had a gun, or he could have pulled the gun, or he could have pointed at me. This isn't of what could have happened. This is a case of what was happening. The officer was being choked. Was being choked out of him at the time he utilized deadly force. One of the most justified officer-involved shootings ever caught on video. That's not good enough for Ben Crump, because he filed a $16 million lawsuit against the deputy and of Camden County. The thing with Ben Crump, and Motorcycle Chronicles was talking about this a second ago, is that he essentially has no incentive to be honest. He has no incentive, no need, no intent to be honest. He basically relies that no one is going to call him out on his bullshit, because Ben Crump knows that as soon as someone calls him out on his bullshit, they're going to be accused of racism, and that's exactly what's going to happen. That's why no one calls out the veracity of anything he says. Here's what I mean by that. For example, during this press conference, now Ben Crump, he basically said he filed the $16 million lawsuit, and the reason he said $16 million is significant, and here's why. It represents 1 year for every year that Leonard Cure was incarcerated. Hang on. Leonard Cure being incarcerated before by different government actors, and again, he already settled that case for $800,000. He's been free for 3 years. That has nothing to do with him trying to kill a police officer and then losing his life in the process. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. But Ben Crump, he talked a lot about those 16 years, which is why they're suing for $16 million. Now, he also talked about the officer's record. He talks about internal affairs investigations against the officer from a decade ago. So hang on. So if we're looking at this case, so here's what Ben Crump is saying is relevant in this lawsuit. What the officer did to violate policy, not law, but violate administrative policy a decade ago, that's relevant. 16 years that Leonard Cure did in prison that this officer had nothing to do with, that's relevant. But Leonard Cure trying to kill the officer by wrapping his hands around the officer's throat, that's not relevant, because that wasn't mentioned once. And guess what? Nobody asks any questions. There are no questions. There are no follow-up questions. When this is covered in the news, they talk about Leonard Cure being an exonerated man who was killed by a police officer. Never once do they say, hey, listen, you know what? Leonard Cure, he was actually trying to kill the police officer when the officer utilized deadly force. So that's why it's just so absolutely insane. It is dishonest. And I just want to say it's not racist to call out liars. It's not racist, and you shouldn't let other people like Ben Crump tell you that you are. All right, so let's see. Autistic Shill has a comment, but he got out angrily screaming at Cure to get out of the car. I don't know if the cop knew Cure's past, but he shouldn't have yelled. Yeah, so Autistic Shill, that's a really good point. And I did have that criticism of the police officer, and I got a lot of pushback from other cops on that. But Autistic Shill, I think you're right. So essentially, what happened was, as the police officer made contact with Mr. Cure, and again, he didn't know Mr. Cure's history, because when you run a license plate, it comes back to the owner of the vehicle, the registered owner of the vehicle. Now, an officer is driving, trying to catch up to a car at 100 miles an hour. The car isn't stopping. You're typing in a license plate. You're calling it into dispatch. I can tell you what the officer isn't doing at that point. The officer isn't going on their phone and doing a Google search of the history of the registered owner. Because again, a lot of times who's driving the car isn't even the registered owner. So no. So the officer absolutely had no idea who he was stopping. So he just didn't possess that information. It would literally be impossible for the officer to possess that information. So what the officer did, as he approached the car, so because Mr. Cure was driving so fast, 100 miles an hour, and the car had tint on it. So again, the officer, not only could the officer not tell how many people were in the car, he couldn't tell who the sex of the person in the car. Yeah, so the officer had no idea who was in the vehicle. So as the officer approached the car, he had already made the decision that he was going to arrest the driver for reckless driving. Okay, that's fine. That's a legal thing that police officers can do. So what he did is, as he was approaching the car, he got kind of like the back of the pickup truck, kind of where the tailgate is, and he started screaming at Mr. Cure to get out of the car, and giving him command to get out of the car and place his hands behind his back. And I said this when I initially covered this case, I don't like it. That's not my style. Now, again, just because I don't like it and it's not my style doesn't mean it's illegal for the police officer to do. It doesn't even mean it's against department policy, right? Because here's what I said at the time when I covered this case, and I think I even wrote an article about this case, and I said it. So typically there's a couple different ways that police officers do traffic stops. The one is the normal way. You walk up to the car. Street cop training, teaches officers to go to the passenger side approach. I happen to like that. I happen to like that aspect of police officers doing traffic stops. It's something that I never did when I was on patrol, but I probably should have. It's probably a safer thing to do. Is that you go up to the passenger side. So you contact the driver and you say, hey, I'm Officer Daniel with the whatever Camden County Sheriff's Department. I see your driver's license, registration, insurance card. Even if you're going to arrest someone, you make contact with them. You go ahead and you get their personal information, so you know who they are, the reason you pulled them over. You ask them for all the documents. Like, that's one normal way. The other time is if you do a felony stop. Let's say someone is so dangerous. And this happens all the time, right? Stolen cars, maybe someone, you do the license plate, you type it in, there happens to be a felony warrant, maybe this is the suspect of a felony. There could be 1,000 different reasons why an officer would do a felony stop. That's typically where you get 2 or 3 officers there, at least 3 officers typically, but I don't know how rural this county is. You get a couple officers there, you typically have lethal and less lethal weapon systems pointed at the car, because it's a felony stop, because the individual is so dangerous that this is why you have to do this, and I'm good with it. That happens a lot of times. I worked in a really violent city, so that's a reasonable thing that would happen all the time. Several times a week we would be doing felony stops, and so you do that, and you use the PA system, and you give people commands to step out of the car with their hands in the air, and you give them all kinds of instructions, and they come back. You place them in handcuffs, throw them in the back of the car, then you ID everybody once the car is clear. I'm good with that. Well, again, this officer did something, again, kind of in the middle, where he didn't have backup there. He didn't go and contact Mr. Cure, but he started to just scream commands at Mr. Cure without telling him who he was, the agency, the reason for the traffic stop. He eventually told him the reason for arrest, but not initially. So the idea that that could trigger PTSD in Leonard Cure, yes, of course that's possible. Maybe that's why Mr. Cure was so aggressive with the officer. Now again, police officers are not psychic. There's absolutely no way for the police officer to know that's the history of Mr. Cure. Okay, so I mean, there's no reason to. So that's why I don't like it. If someone is so dangerous that you're going to arrest them, and I'm good with it, call for backup and do a felony stop, or do a regular traffic stop where you introduce yourself and you say the reason for the stop. So what the officer did, again, it's not illegal. And it's probably not even a violation of policy, but common sense wise, is it a good thing? I said I'm not a fan of that. I'm a fan of either doing a felony stop or a traffic stop where you introduce yourself and you say the reason for the traffic stop and you have that kind of a contact. It's hard to say what would happen. What I do know is that no crime, besides the traffic violations, no crime was committed by either individual until Mr. Cure resisted arrest and then tried to kill the police officer, and it was absolutely a justified use of force, even if the police officer wasn't as nice and friendly as maybe I would want them to be. Again, a policy violation by a police officer is not equivalent, legally or morally, to a violent felony. It's just not. Okay, so the next case that I'm going to go ahead and talk on. This case actually happened a couple years ago, but it was recently in the news. Reference a lawsuit. And I'm really curious what Motorcycle Chronicles podcast has to say, because I think the first time that we interacted was an article I wrote about police officers chasing cars, and it was a case where I don't remember the case exactly, but I do remember that it was a pursuit. And my opinion was that the police officers shouldn't have conducted this pursuit because someone died and the cop was charged, and and me and Motorcycle kind of went back and forth a little bit on this, and I definitely appreciate when people have, especially educated and experienced individuals, have a different opinion than me on these cases. That's good. That's where we can have reasonable discussions. That's where we can get to, I think, a place that everybody wants, where bad guys go to jail and police officers are safe, right? Okay, so this is a case that happened a couple years ago in December of 21, and it essentially happened in Boynton Beach, Florida. Boynton Beach, Florida, it was a 13-year-old named Stanley Davis III. His parents, for whatever reason, bought Stanley Davis Jr. A dirt bike, bought him a dirt bike, and then essentially let him ride this dirt bike all around the streets without any adult supervision in Boynton Beach, Florida. Now, the Florida law basically, the kind of dirt bike that he had, it was classified in the state of Florida under Florida law as an OHV, an off-highway vehicle, and basically what the law said is that you had to be 16 years old in order to drive this thing by itself. So not only is that what the law says, but essentially these are always sold with essentially this kit is sold with a package of Monster Energy drinks and a mullet. But for whatever reason, Stanley Davis is driving this thing around. He's 13 years old. His parents let him do it, and as he's driving this thing around Boynton Beach, Florida, he's driving kind of like an idiot. He's driving in a reckless fashion that obviously and predictably garnered the attention of a police officer in Boynton Beach. The police officer tried to stop him. Stanley Davis, being 13 years old, decided he wasn't going to stop him for the police officer, and there was a pursuit. The police officer, not my opinion, but the opinion of the police department, is that the officer chased and pursued against department policy, and essentially that broke department policy, and said that the officer should not have pursued as long as he did. As the officer was pursuing the 13-year-old on this dirt bike, the investigation found the 13-year-old got up to about 85 miles an hour. Now, I have a hard time believing that this vehicle could travel that fast, but all the reports on this case, that's how fast it said it was going. So don't get mad at me for reporting that, because that's what it said. Though I have a hard time believing it could travel that fast. But anyways, that's what the police department said, is that the kid was able to get this thing up to 85 miles an hour. He crashed and he died. The police officer was fired for violation of policy when it comes to pursuing it outside of or against the department policy. And I just want to say that my thoughts on this, I'm really curious on what Motorcycle has to say in Boom News, is that, my opinions on this is that, I don't really blame the teenager because the kid's 13 years old. I don't blame the police officer, even though the police officer violated policy. Again, I've said it before, a violation of department policy is different and not equivalent to committing a violent felony, to running from police officers, to committing crimes. They're not the same, all right? So yes, I want police officers to follow policy, but again, violation of an administrative policy is not a crime. It just isn't. This is a tragic example of absent and irresponsible parents. That's who I blame. However, despite that, the parents have filed a federal lawsuit for deprivation of rights for several $1 million against the police officer and against the police officer and against the police department. I know we always talk about qualified immunity. This is one of those cases where I think there could be a qualified immunity fight. Now, a lot of times when people comment about motorcycle says the parent should be charged for allowing the kid to ride on the roadway, I agree 100%. 100%. Motorcycle, because think about it, motorcycle, what if this kid had done the exact same thing he did, only killing himself, he killed someone else? Who would be at fault? Legally, the parents would be at fault, right? So again, so logically and legally, it just doesn't make any sense. But the parents are suing the police department, and here's where I think there could be an interesting qualified immunity fight, because again, a lot of times when people comment, not people like Boom News and Motor Cop, but a lot of people who don't know comment about qualified immunity. But essentially, qualified immunity is protection for police officers and really all government employees, but we're talking about police officers when it comes to civil lawsuits. So that's all it's protection for. Qualified immunity does not stop police officers from being investigated, suspended, disciplined, having their police officer license revoked. It doesn't prevent them from facing criminal charges on the local level or on the federal level. All qualified immunity does is protect police officers from civil lawsuits that are against them personally. That's all it does. And cops only have that protection, if they did not violate, and I quote, clearly established rights. So, a lot of the time where, let's say, a police officer doesn't violate rights, but they're sued. Cajun Randy says qualified immunity is made up out of thin air by the Supreme Court. Cajun Randy, you're right. It's not a federal law. It's not a federal statute. Qualified immunity is qualified immunity is a judge-made doctrine. So yeah, you're 100% right there. So it's qualified immunity is starting to go away. On the state level, it is Boom News. Yeah, some states have gotten rid of it on the state side, but not necessarily on the federal side. That is still there. So what you have to look at in this case is, basically the police department has said, hey, this officer violated our department policy, so we are not, so he violated policy, we're going to go ahead and fire him. So now, if the officer is sued along with the city, a lot of times the city will, cover for the police officer, but we'll see if that's the case here, to see if that's actually going to happen or not. All right, so the last case that I want to talk about, this is one that I've covered before. There were just some, and this is just a quick update, the Elijah McClain case. So the Elijah McClain case happened in Aurora, Colorado. He was the young black kid with autism who was walking around at night in a ski mask. Someone called police, said, hey, he looks suspicious, hadn't committed a crime. He looked suspicious. I mean, again, he's walking around at night in a residential neighborhood with a ski mask on. Is that weird? Yes. Is it suspicious? Yes. Now, does weird and suspicious, does that equal a crime was committed? No. And what do police officers need in order to detain someone? Even on the very lowest level, police officers need reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. But they have to articulate what that crime is. They can't just say, hey, you're weird and suspicious, we're going to go ahead and stop you. No. Basically, what it is there's a crime that was committed. Hey, this guy in the ski mask, there was just a burglary at this residence. The person who left is a 20-year-old black kid, and he's wearing a ski mask. Police officers get there 3 minutes later and 2 blocks away. They see one young black guy there in a ski mask. Yeah, they can detain him because that's reasonable suspicion that crimes have been committed. That doesn't mean he's guilty. That doesn't mean he's going to go to jail, but that's enough to at least detain him. But that isn't the case here with Elijah McClain. He was walking around in a ski mask just because he's weird, okay? Just because he's a strange guy, which is not against the law. Police officers respond to the call, and they go ahead and detain him. And Elijah McClain, he resists. He doesn't want to be detained because, again, he didn't do anything wrong. Police officers use force against him. They get him into custody, and they realize this guy's weird. He's got to be on something. He's having some medical issues. Like, something's wrong with this guy, so police officers call medics. Once medics get there, medics give him way too much ketamine. That's what the autopsy showed, and that's what the medical examiner showed, is that, they gave him way too much ketamine, and essentially the ketamine killed him. Both police officers and the medics were charged were charged in this case. And I said from the very beginning, I said the police officers had absolutely zero reasonable suspicion to stop him and to detain him. That's wrong. So is that a policy violation? Is that a civil rights violation? Whatever the cops did right there, that was 100. Now, because the police officers used force when it was an illegal detention, is that some kind of a battery or some kind of a criminal charge? I'm with you. I'm with you there. I think the cops fucked up there. They should not have detained him, and they definitely should not have used force to detain someone who hadn't committed a crime. There was no lawful objective there. Okay. So again, if you wanted to fire the cops, sue them for civil rights violations for the initial detention, and then charge them with battery, I can walk down that path with you. I can see a pathway there where that's reasonable. But charging the cops with murder, that's absolutely insane. They never should have done that because the police officers didn't kill him. The paramedics who were there on scene, who gave the kid ketamine, they're the ones who killed him. That was the cause of death. So one of the police officers, Nathan Woodyard, who was indicted for murder on this case, he was just acquitted. He was returned to his job, and because they fired him over being charged with that, he was able to get back pay. He got $212,000 in back pay. Here's the lesson. Do not suspend, fire, or prosecute police officers for no good reason. Just like I said, I honestly think that the police officer messed up with the initial detention, okay? That's where the officer messed up. Cajun Randy, what were they charged with? Was it manslaughter? They were charged with something under one of the homicide statutes. I don't know the exact charge, but was it manslaughter? What were they charged with, Cajun Randy? Something like that. It was a serious felony. It was somewhere. It was under the homicide statutes. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they were charged with something like that. So but again, the officer, when it comes to Elijah's death, the officers should not have been charged at all, okay? This is a case of overcharging police officers. Again, had the department investigated the police officers just for the initial detention, and had the state charged the officers just with the battery, just with the initial use of force, they probably would have been successful in that, because I honestly think that's what the cops did wrong in this case. They probably would have been successful in that. The officers would have been fired, and they probably would have gotten, probation for the battery, and that probably, okay, so one person was convicted, Cajun Randy, fine. One guy was convicted, but how many police officers? So negligent homicide, I think, is what they were charged. Okay, so one guy was convicted, but none of the other cops have been convicted. All right, none of them were convicted. Let's see, besides Rodema. So one guy, negligent homicide and third-degree assault, I think, is the one guy who was convicted, but the other ones weren't. And what I'm saying is that you have a case like this. They overcharge this police officer. They based his termination from employment on that overcharging. And what's the result? He's acquitted. He gets his job back. He gets over $200,000. So again, if you honestly think the police officers did something wrong, you should not like the overcharging of police officers, because this is the predictable result. Just like I said, police officers, if they commit a crime, they should be charged. They should not be overcharged, okay? They should not be overcharged, but they should not be, because this is why. This is the reason for it. You charge them with what they did, not with, these fantasy crimes of something that they didn't do. Cops blame the paramedics, and the paramedics blame this case on the cops, Cajun, which is ridiculous. I know I've talked about this before, but this is insane. For the paramedics to blame the cops. So basically, if you're the paramedic and you show up on scene and you're talking about something medical, you should not listen to anything that a police officer says. Here's why. So I went to the police academy in 2005, and I went to the police academy in 2005, and I got basic CPR training. And every couple years I got a couple hour updates, right, of that. But again, I'm not a paramedic. I'm not an EMT. They should not listen to me at all when it comes to a medical decision. That's why police officers call paramedics, to make a medical decision of what's going on there. They absolutely should have nothing to do with it. Let's see. Steve Sladner says, "What do you think about district attorneys dropping charges against officers after being indicted by grand juries?" Yeah, I think that. So a district attorney, they have a job. Their job is to seek the truth. So they're not supposed to be on the side of cops. They're not supposed to not be on the side of cops. District attorneys are elected, and they're supposed to seek the truth. They're not supposed to just try to win. They're trying to seek the truth. So I think we would have to talk about like what the specific case was, and I would have to listen to why the district attorney did that, and then I would have a decision on it. The thing is, district attorneys are elected, so if the people in that community disagree, there's a very easy way to get rid of that district attorney. Is they can go ahead and elect someone else to that position. All right, so that's the last case that I'm going to cover. I'm going to give a little teaser for next week, because there is a case that, even though I live here in the Southwest, there's really a strange case that's happened in Phoenix right now that's happening in Phoenix right now that I just haven't been aware of. And again, I follow these cases. I write articles on police stuff. I do daily content over on my Twitter and TikTok, and I didn't know about this case. So I'm going to tease it. I'm also going to tease that we have a body camera footage dropping tomorrow with a DoorDash driver. So you guys love those kinds of videos. It's coming out tomorrow, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment on that one. But what I'm going to talk about is this case. It's happened out of Phoenix, and I was just made aware of it this morning. So my friend Drew Breezy, who's over on the podcast Failure to Stop, he got a hold of me this morning. He wanted to talk with me about it, so I did some research on it. I didn't know about this case. Essentially, in Phoenix, there's a female homicide detective with the homicide unit who the allegation is that she mishandled evidence in about 30-something homicide cases. The supervisors got wind of it. And as soon as they got wind of it, an internal investigation started. She went ahead and went on medical leave and retired. There's still over 30 murder cases that are pending that it's unknown if she's going to testify or not. The news there in Phoenix has been hounding her, trying to figure out what's going on with her. Apparently she started a couple other businesses, so they've tried to set up appointments to try to get her on record. So I'm really interested to see what happens with this case. I'm gonna do a deep dive on it this week, and I'm gonna probably lead with that case this week. A couple other wrinkles to this case is her husband is an assistant police chief. Also, all of this is under the cloud of the Department of Justice in Phoenix right now doing a pattern and practice investigation, and they're trying to determine, the two parties are going back and forth, whether or not there's going to be a consent decree in Phoenix. So the Department of Justice is investigating Phoenix Police Department, and now we have these 30 murder cases. Who knows what's going to happen because of a detective who's married to an assistant chief. Again, maybe no one did anything wrong, but they aren't saying a whole lot about it, and it's an interesting case, and it's one that I'm going to do a deep dive into this week. I may even go on Failure to Stop to talk with Drew Breezy about it as well. But that's going to be our show for the week. I want to thank everyone for being in here. Thank you for all of the comments and the back and forth. I hope that everyone has a safe weekend, and if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next Friday.